Double the trouble, double the thrills, double the gore. Let's talk about The Exorcist Believer. Hey everyone, it's David Stark from Watcher Pass. I'm here to talk to you about The Exorcist Believer, which is coming to theaters on October 6, 2023. They finally did it. They made an Exorcist sequel, the thing that we've all been calling for. Well, not really. I mean, The Exorcist is a classic. It is a wonderful piece of cinema. It is one of the scariest movies that you've probably ever seen. It was kind of a revelation, a horrible, horrible revelation when it came out in 1973, I think. And now, 50 years later, they have made an Exorcist sequel. Now, is this better than the original? Well, no, of course it's not better than the original, but my hot take is, look, I think you should actually watch it. I liked it a lot. I liked it seemed to take a lot from the Exorcist formula while updating the story in a few interesting ways. It still had a really great slow buildup. It had really good practical effects, except for a few parts. And it had plenty of gore and dread, building up to the big final scene. I think you can probably guess what the big event at the end was. It's a movie called The Exorcist, so it had a lot to like. There were a few things I didn't love about it, but overall I enjoyed this much more than I expected to. There was a little bit of silliness going on, but I'll talk about that in the things I didn't like and in the recap. So that being said, I'm going to tell you a little bit more of the film, a few things I liked, a few things I didn't like, and then really quickly go into the ending. So as you can imagine, there will be spoilers in the ending section. If you don't want to know what happens in this movie, and you might not because there are some big twists towards the end, that would turn off when I get to the ending section. Before that, though, I'll keep it vague. I'll keep it spoiler-free, and I'll let you know when I get to those spoilers. So in The Exorcist Believer, you have Victor, who is raising his daughter, Angela, and he's doing his best. He's trying to be a good dad, but she's growing up. She's starting to kind of like, I don't know, stretch her wings, wants to kind of hang out with one of her friends. And he says, okay, that's fine. Just make sure you're home by dinner. Well, spoiler alert, she doesn't come home by dinner. And when they start looking for her, there's something very sinister has happened to not only her, but her friend as well. So, things I liked about this movie. The first, I like the really slow start. Look, I like horror movies that build up slowly, that take their time getting there. And this film was no different. It's kind of like The Exorcist. This movie takes a while to get to the big horror extravaganza. You've got a few things at the start, but overall, this film takes its time building up the dread, building up the situation, letting the unease kind of fester and simmer as you're waiting for that big event to happen. The second thing I love, look, I love the performances. Look, The Exorcist is one of those movies that has just this crazy performance by this little girl who is doing these horrible, horrible things. And in this movie, you have two little girls who are doing these horrible, horrible things. As you can see from the poster, there are two possessed girls, and they both do a really fantastic job. They're really wonderful with their kind of unsettling demeanor, their looks, the way that they kind of like subtly, jerkily move here and there. The whole film is kind of lives or dies based on how good these girls are, and they are fantastic. The third thing I love, look, I love the effects. The Exorcist is a practical effects kind of horror nightmare, wonderful horror nightmare, and this is no different. They do a really good job, especially with kind of the possession looks, bloating, the kind of deformation that happens, just the fact that there's always like blood or something oozing out of these girls. They're like, their nails get all messed up, their skin gets all messed up. It is really just a sight to behold, and you kind of have to have that to kind of let you know what is happening and how painful and horrifying this is for everyone involved. The fourth thing I love the music. It has little bits of the Exorcist music. It definitely plays during some key moments. Where this is coming from, and to let you know that this is kind of based on the source material. I did love that. I did love hearing that music pop in. It was definitely a nice treat, and it played a few times throughout. So it definitely kind of like kept that through line throughout the film. And the last thing I love related to the music, that leads me right into this next point, the callbacks. This film had some interesting references to the original Exorcist, something that fans of the original movie will definitely love. And although the film did update the formula and make it a little different for the second movie, it definitely kind of knew where its roots were and tried to kind of appease those fans as well. So all that being said, there's a lot I liked about this movie. Things I didn't love as much. The first, and this was a shocker to me because The Exorcist is a practical effects wonder. This film seemed to kind of lean heavily on the practical effects for most of it, but there is some CG, and it's fairly noticeable. There's some CG involving some smoke and some vapor, and some of the blood, some of the bigger blood scenes are CG as well. And I was kind of shocked by this. Thankfully, there's only a few of them, but they definitely looked strange. They definitely looked different from the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie seems to lean very heavily on the practical effects. Those few CG scenes were distracting, and the unfortunate thing is they were in very pivotal moments, things that like you kind of needed to be perfect, and I'm really kind of disappointed that they didn't do those on the practical side. The second thing I didn't love, and kind of the only other thing I really didn't love, there's some ridiculousness to the big kind of climactic scene. It is well done. It does a good job, but there is some kind of silliness in the buildup. It's part of how they're changing up the formula, so I kind of understand it, but there are some kind of silly moments in the buildup to this big scene. And the last thing I didn't love as much, it doesn't feel kind of as dramatic as the first one. And maybe that is just me viewing it through my rose-colored glasses. But I thought the first one, the whole exorcism was an ordeal. It went on and on. This movie, it has that really nice buildup, and then the exorcism itself is a very big moment, but it doesn't feel like it has the same kind of level of gravity. It doesn't feel like it has the same effort required. It doesn't feel as big and as impactful as the original Exorcist was. So maybe that is just me kind of fondly remembering that movie, but it feels like this film, the exorcism itself, could have been a little bit longer. They could have had a few more phases to it. But all that being said, look, I liked this movie. I thought it was much better than I expected it to be. I definitely think you should watch it, especially if you're a fan of the original Exorcist movies. So that is The Exorcist Believer. It comes out on October 6th, 2023, just in time for spooky season, just in time for Halloween, just in time to start giving you nightmares for the month of October. So check it out in theaters. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you liked and didn't like. I'm going to go to the ending right now. So if you don't want to know what happens in this movie, then you might not. There's some pretty big surprises. I would turn it off now because there will be spoilers. So like I said, in this film, you've got Angela and her friend Katherine. They go off into the woods after school one day and perform this ritual. It's like a hypnotism ritual. They call on some spirits. Angela really wants to talk to her mother, who died during childbirth. Actually, her mother died in Haiti when Angela's father and her mother were on vacation. They were, I guess, probably taking like a baby moon, and that an earthquake hit that caused Angela's mother to be kind of like buried in rubble. Her father was able to save her, but he has to make a horrible choice because anything they do to save the mother could be traumatic to the baby. So he has to kind of choose, does he want to save the mother or the baby? We find out 13 years later that Angela survived, and so she grew up without her mother, and so she wants to speak to her mother. She wants to kind of get that connection, and so she tries to do this ritual. Now, as you'd imagine, this ritual does not go very well, and all of a sudden, Angela and Katherine are gone. They're missing. We don't know where they are. That leads to a manhunt. That leads to kind of a crazy, stressful situation for all the parents involved. And eventually the girls show up 3 days later in a barn, and they are both kind of like, they're shoeless, their feet are deformed, they're kind of in shock. They don't really know what happened. They thought they were only gone for a couple hours, but they were gone for a few days. Now, they get checked out at the hospital. Everything seems fine, right? They're probably okay. They have no trauma. But when they go back home, things look a little differently. They start to act differently. They start to kind of act a lot more creepily, especially with Victor and Angela in their house. There are some very, very creepy moments involving light, involving like surprises, involving like Angela staring off in the distance and not like making eye contact with Victor. It is unsettling. And like I said, I love the slow buildup. It takes a while to kind of get to where it's going. But eventually, they figure out that these girls are probably possessed. Now, Victor takes Angela to a hospital where she is kind of restrained, sedated, and they start to evaluate her. Now, Katherine does not go to a hospital, and her family gets terrorized by her for a little bit. But eventually, Victor and some of the people around him realize that there is something more going on. Now, especially his neighbor, who was training to join a convent, was training to be a nun, decided that she couldn't do that life, and became a nurse. Now she is watching over Angela, and she starts to realize some things that are happening to her that seem to jog a memory. And she gives Victor a copy of this book written by Chris MacNeil, the mother in the original Exorcist movie. She wrote a book about her experiences in this fictional universe about kind of the exorcism and what all that entailed. Now, Victor is not a faith person. He does not have a religion, but when he starts reading this book, some of the things about it relate very much to what Angela is going through. So he goes out to talk to her. She agrees to help him. And afterwards, they decide to visit Katherine's house. This is where they go to see Katherine, who has not been in a hospital, who has not been restrained. And her house is just a disaster. Her dad is kind of like sitting in the corner. Her mother and younger sister and brother are all huddled together. Things are turned over. Things are destroyed. They make their way upstairs, and Chris decides to go by herself because she's seen the situation before. She goes to Katherine. She kind of talks to her. She does a very basic exorcism. Seems to go well. Seems to go well for Katherine. until Katherine turns and grabs a crucifix and stabs Chris's eyes. So now Chris can't see. Not good. Not good for the exorcism. But she survives. They restrain Katherine. They gather them together and they decide, you know what? We have to do something about this. We have to take this into our own hands. So they do an exorcism. Now, one of the things that they change in the original Exorcist, right? There was only kind of a Catholic priest. He did the exorcism. It was a big ordeal. In this movie, they decide, you know what? We're not going to rely on one faith. We're going to gather a bunch. So they gather a kind of who's who of various faiths in this film because, like, Katherine, I think, was more on like the Methodist tradition. So she has a more traditional pastor. Victor and Angela's neighbor is Catholic, so she gets involved and she tries to get the Catholic Church involved. You have some like more, I don't know, like nature-based religion. It's still like a god religion, it seems like, but it seems to focus more on like nature and herbs. She was brought in early to try to like put a blessing on Angela when she was gone. So she comes in too. You got someone who's a little bit more like I don't know, speaking in tongues. I'm not sure which tradition that was, but he's more of like the speaking in tongues, like, you know, dancing religion. You've got a whole host of religious characters coming together to do this exorcism. I called it like the Avengers Assemble, or like maybe a Captain Planet type situation. You have the faith Avengers come to do this exorcism. Now, when they all gather, you've got the parents, you've got these various faith figures. The Catholic priest tried to get this to become a sanctioned exorcism, but the church apparently was a little bit cautious, a little bit hesitant. They end up not sanctioning it, so he does not participate. But the neighbor, who was trained to be a nun, she decides to kind of take on the mantle and be the main exorcist performer. And so they go through a few different rounds. Originally, it is the neighbor kind of doing the ritual. She makes a little bit of progress, and then they have like the spiritualist kind of pour water on them, and eventually they break them down, and the girls start saying that they have to choose. They start like basically saying like, one girl lives, one girl dies, you have to choose. And so these parents are looking at each other and like, we can't choose. Like, we can't choose who. We can't make that choice, which is probably the right choice, right? This is definitely a test. And it's building the girls are like begging, like, you know, choose me, why don't you choose me? And that's when, boom, the door opens, and like WWE style, the Catholic priest comes in and starts doing the ritual. He decides to help. The kids are like writhing, and one thing that he does that no one else did before, they kept saying like, don't touch them, don't touch them. Well, the Catholic priest comes and like lays hands on them with the rosaries, prays for them, and it seems to be working. It seems to be going well until the girls like start kind of turning their necks and looking at the priest, and the priest's neck starts to turn as well. His head starts to turn. He seems to be in more distress, and then snap, he turns his head all the way around. He collapses. It was interesting because this felt like the big kind of pivotal climactic moment where he was going to come in, save the day. I thought it was a little bit cheesy, but they turned it on their heads. I guess they turned on his head, to be honest. And they kind of changed this up in a wonderful, horrible way. I don't know why he was specifically affected. I wonder if it's possible, like, it wasn't a sanctioned exorcism, so maybe some of his like faked armor didn't come in, or he actually touched them where no one else did, so maybe they were more easily able to affect him. I'm not sure, but in any event, the priest is dead, and this causes a panic in the parents. And one of the parents, the father of Katherine, says like, I choose you, Katherine. And that causes a whole bunch of like commotion and chaos. The parents start unwrapping the kids because they get scared, they get nervous, and the kids start like rising up in the air, like they're being like called up. And Angela like looks up and like starts vomiting out blood. And this was the other CG scene. Earlier there was like a vapor that came out of them, and then one of the spiritualists like started a fire, and the smoke like sucked up the vapor and it came back into the fireplace. It looked okay, not great, like definitely clearly CG. This was the other kind of big CG scene where Angela is just spewing blood up onto the ceiling, and it creates like a vortex or a portal or something up there. And she's looking up, and then both girls fall down, and Angela flatlines. But not only is Angela flatline, Katherine flatlines as well. And so there's a bunch of commotion. You're not sure what's happening. And eventually Angela wakes up, but Katherine doesn't. And the priest kind of you hear him like yell during this whole commotion, like, it's a trick, they've been tricked. So it seems like the girls were like making, testing them again, or at least the demon who was possessing the girls was testing the family again. And because the dad said that he chooses Katherine, it's caused the old switcheroo. So they both flatline, but Angela wakes up. Katherine is still on the ground, flatlining. They start kind of doing medical procedures to her, trying to revive her. Nothing seems to be working. The cops show up, the paramedics show up. There's a big commotion as they kind of come in and survey the damage. And it turns out there were 2 deaths in this exorcism. You had Katherine die, and you had the Catholic priest die. So I guess in every exorcist movie, probably a Catholic priest has to die. Maybe that's their like signature move. So next you see like the police at the scene. They're kind of cleaning up. You see the priest in a body bag. You see, you see Katherine on the ground with her eyes closed, not reviving. You see the parents kind of like talking to the police. And then you see a church during the day. And then you see kind of a police investigation talking to the neighbor. And it feels like there was probably some sort of legal proceeding happening, because they mentioned that the neighbor should wait for her counsel to talk. And she starts talking. She doesn't say specifics, but she talks kind of about the ordeal. And while she's talking, we see scenes of the characters. So you see Angela. She seems to be better. She seems to have recovered. She's in her classroom and she's looking over and she sees the empty seat where Katherine usually would sit. You also see her father, Victor, who is at the grave of his wife. He goes to visit her. And one of the things you'd find out during this, one of the kind of like revelations that the demon that was possessing Angela said, was that when Victor had to choose in Haiti, when he had to choose between his wife and his daughter, he chose his wife. And unfortunately, well, I guess, I don't know, it's not really a fortunate or unfortunate, because it's a horrible choice. Or his wife couldn't be saved. And when they found it out, they were able to at least save Angela. So they cut Angela out of his wife. His wife died and Angela lived. So you kind of thought at the start that he chose Angela, but in a big dramatic scene during the exorcism, you find out that he actually chose his wife. Angela was, I guess like sacrificed or whatever. And that is what the demon tries to bring up to him to like make him feel guilt. So it seems like he has come to terms with his choice. Seems like he is feeling better. And so he is at her grave, at his wife's grave, and, kisses the grave and keeps walking. You also see Katherine's parents, who are dealing with their grief. You can tell that they are, upset about this, but it seems like they are at least trying. You see the dad like at a coffee shop, kind of by himself, and you're like, oh, this is not good. But then the mom comes up and they see each other. So it seems like they are trying to recover as well. And then you get the big revelation, this big thing at the end. You see Chris. She's in the hospital. You knew that she'd survived, but she had lost her eyes. So she's in the hospital recovering. And one of the things that she told Victor early on, that when she wrote that book, the book that Victor read and like went to Chris to talk about, when she wrote that, like Reagan, her daughter, just like fell off the map, like stopped contacting her. Like she would still talk to her, but she wouldn't tell her where she was. She wouldn't visit her mom. She like had wanted to forget the whole ordeal. And that book thrust it right into the spotlight. Reagan was upset. And so she just kind of left and did not see her mom since then. Now, one of the things her mom really wanted was to see Reagan before she died. And so her mom was in the hospital. Someone enters her room and you're like, uh-oh, is this going to be like a horrible scene? Her mom calls out who that is. And then you see a hand grasp her hand and you see Reagan there. And she, says, hi, mom, or something to that effect. And they embrace. And so it's an interesting end, because her mom is in the same room as Reagan. They meet, but she doesn't actually see Reagan because she lost her eyes. But she metaphorically sees Reagan, and she, I guess, is able to kind of like make amends for writing that book and able to see her daughter. So it is a happy ending. They got the original actor who played Reagan back. They got the original actor who played Chris. It is really kind of a nice homage to the original movie and a nice way to like wrap up the story and kind of tie the two together. So that is the end of the movie. After their embrace, you see the Exorcist believer kind of splash screen and the music plays. And the credits happen. There is no stinger, so you don't have to sit around for the credits. You can head out right after that. But that is Exorcist Believer. It comes to the theaters on October 6th, 2023. Like I said, I think you should watch it. I liked a lot about it. It had some silliness, especially with the whole like faith team coming together and whatnot. But, it definitely had enough going for it that I think is an enjoyable movie and a good movie to see in theaters. It's good to see with like a crowd. There are definitely some winces, so definitely some jumps and a little bit of laughs as well. So definitely a good movie to see in theaters. And if you do see it, let me know what you liked. Let me know what you didn't like. Let me know what I got right and wrong. I'd love to hear it. And thanks so much for watching. If you like this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.